He came home from a business trip, only to overhear his wife plotting to betray him, steal his inheritance, and leave him with nothing. But she had no idea who she was really up against. Julian Hayes returned from a demanding overseas trip just as twilight draped the quiet suburban neighborhood in muted gold. His polished shoes tapped rhythmically against the stone walkway leading to the front door of the house he had shared with his wife, Callista, for nearly a decade. The air smelled faintly of lavender, blending with the earthy scent of fresh-cut grass. Julian longed for nothing more than to embrace his wife, shed the week's exhaustion, and retreat into the familiar comfort of home. But as he reached the entrance, an unexpected sound floated through the slightly cracked window above the porch. A voice. Callista's, soft, but tinged with a sharpness that made Julian pause instinctively, his hand hovering near the doorknob. He stayed still, listening. Once the estate transfer is finalized, I'll file for divorce. I just need access to the money first. He's clueless enough not to suspect a thing. The words sliced through the air like ice, every syllable driving a spike into Julian's chest. His breath caught. Inside, another voice answered, a familiar one. Mira Halden, Callista's closest confidant. Their laughter followed, quiet and conspiratorial. For several seconds, Julian remained frozen, the sounds of betrayal crashing over him in waves. Every odd moment he had previously dismissed now returned in sharp focus. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne, the sudden concern with his family's finances, the secretive smiles while texting late into the night. He no longer needed proof. Her intent had been spelled out with chilling clarity. Clenching his jaw, Julian gripped his briefcase with white knuckles. He wouldn't confront her now. Rage had no place in his plan. Instead, he breathed deeply and settled into a deliberate calm. If Callista thought she was the only one capable of deception, she was about to be proven wrong. With a practiced expression, Julian opened the front door and stepped inside. The hallway smelled of vanilla candles and floor polish, deceptively peaceful. Callista greeted him with the poise of someone who had mastered her act. Her appearance, down to the impeccable waves of her auburn hair and the gentle tilt of her smile, was flawless. A casual observer would see the perfect spouse. Julian now saw something else entirely, a mask concealing predatory intent. She approached and brushed her lips against his cheek, a gesture that once stirred affection now felt repulsive. Her voice rang out, light and cheerful, as she asked about his trip. He replied with equal warmth, asking after Mira, who appeared moments later with a strained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The conversation danced on the surface. Pleasant, mundane. Beneath it, Julian tracked every movement, every glance exchanged between the women. He noticed the flicker of uncertainty in Callista's expression when he mentioned returning early. Myra's fingers twisted nervously in the hem of her sweater. They were scrambling behind their smiles, but Julian gave them nothing to cling to. He played his role seamlessly. Later, upstairs in the darkened bedroom, Julian lay beside Callista as she drifted to sleep. The quiet of the house belied the storm brewing inside him. Her presence, once comforting, now seemed parasitic. Waiting until her breathing deepened into sleep, he rose and retrieved her phone from her purse, unlocking it with ease. Years of marriage had given him access she assumed he no longer remembered or noticed. The screen lit up. Julian's fingers moved with mechanical precision as he searched for messages, emails, notes. Anything that could validate what he already knew. What he found exceeded even his worst expectations. Thread after thread of romantic messages between Callista and Alden Crane, a real estate broker Julian had once called a friend, unfolded on the screen. Their correspondence was intimate, graphic, and filled with plans. They spoke of meetings in secluded places, of a future together built from the remnants of Julian's life. Most disturbing were their conversations about his family's assets and strategies to ensure Callista would be the sole inheritor. Julian sat motionless, the phone casting a pale glow across his hardened features. Every message was a blade, every word a betrayal deeper than the last. But instead of despair, he felt cold resolve settle in his chest. These messages were no longer just painful, they were leverage. Just before sunrise, Julian returned the phone to her purse, undisturbed and exactly where it had been. He slipped back under the covers, his body stiff beside the woman he could no longer stand to touch. Her hand brushed against his shoulder in her sleep. He didn't move. By mid-morning, he was at his parents' home, tucked away in a quiet town an hour's drive away. The modest white house with green shutters looked unchanged, but signs of aging had crept in. His father's antique car remained in the driveway, and his mother's rose garden still bloomed. The normalcy hurt more than comforted. Vivian Hayes answered the door, her eyes lighting up as she saw her son. Julian stepped into her embrace, but his mind was elsewhere, already bracing for confirmation of Callista's deeper betrayal. Robert Hayes greeted him from his recliner, thinner and frilier than Julian remembered. As they spoke, Julian listened carefully. His mother mentioned that Callista had been incredibly helpful lately, doing errands, helping with financial documents. And then, without realizing the weight of her words, she mentioned something that chilled him further. Callista had assisted in updating their estate plans for precaution. Julian maintained his composure, masking the spike of alarm that coursed through him. He smiled gently and suggested they all review the documents together, just for peace of mind. His parents agreed without question. And in that moment, Julian's quiet war began. The next morning, Julian Hayes escorted his parents to the office of their longtime attorney, Stellan Voss. The downtown building was modest but well-kept, the kind of place where integrity still held value. As they stepped inside, Julian remained composed, but his eyes were alert. His instincts were no longer guided by emotion, they were honed by strategy. Stellan, an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, welcomed them with professional warmth. Julian had known him since childhood, and in this moment, that trust mattered more than ever. They settled into leather chairs, the low hum of the air conditioner the only sound as Stellan pulled out a file. He began explaining the recent modifications to the Hayes family estate plan, changes that Julian had suspected, but hoped were merely exaggerated. Unfortunately, the documents confirmed his worst fears. Virtually the entire inheritance, property, investments, even Robert's vintage car, had been reassigned to Callista Morgan. Julian's name had been reduced to a token mention. Vivian's face paled as she absorbed the details. She looked to her husband, bewildered. Robert's eyes narrowed in quiet fury, and Julian knew at once. This had not been their intent. Staying calm, Julian reassured his parents, gently proposing they reverse the changes and restore the previous version of the will. Stellan nodded, already reaching for the required forms. As the lawyer began drafting the corrections, he asked to speak with Julian alone. Once the others had stepped out, Stellan lowered his voice. "Something about all this feels off," he said. "I've known your parents for decades. They wouldn't make these decisions without full clarity. You'd be wise to protect yourself moving forward." Julian offered a solemn nod. "I already have a plan." Later that day, Julian stood before the unassuming office of Declan Hart, a private investigator known for his discretion and effectiveness. The frosted glass door bore the name in fading black letters. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and coffee, and the man behind the desk looked like he'd been pulled from a hard-boiled detective novel. Sharp-jawed, precise, and direct. Julian didn't waste time. He presented Declan with a carefully assembled folder. Screenshots, notes, dates, locations, all pointing to Callista's ongoing affair with Alden Crane. Declan reviewed the file with practiced ease, whistling low under his breath. "This isn't just infidelity," he said. "This looks like a coordinated scheme." Julian nodded. "I need hard proof, photos, recordings, anything admissible in court. And fast." Declan cracked a grin. "You came to the right place." While the investigator got to work, Julian turned his attention to another front. His career. The architectural firm where he worked was managing a massive urban renewal project, one that could secure the company's reputation and Julian's legacy. Despite the turmoil in his personal life, Julian threw himself into the project with renewed purpose. Long days were filled with strategy meetings, site visits, and design sessions. His clients praised his focus and innovation. No one suspected that his nights were spent compiling evidence and reading through betrayals that would have broken a lesser man. It wasn't long before Callista, sensing Julian's distance, proposed a dinner to reconnect. She invited Mira Halden and Alden Crane, under the guise of a casual evening among friends. Julian accepted without hesitation. What she saw as a clever manipulation, he viewed as an opportunity. At the upscale restaurant, Julian arrived with his usual composure. Across from him sat Alden, ever confident, ever smooth. Mira chatted nervously while Callista played the attentive wife with unsettling ease. Hidden within Julian's tailored jacket, a discreet recording device captured every word. He guided the conversation artfully, encouraging Alden to brag about his latest deals and supposed insider tips. The man, enamored with his own image, obliged readily. Myra's laughter rang hollow, her eyes flitting from Julian to Callista with growing discomfort. Subtle references to the affair were made. Financial remarks slipped into the dialogue. Callista played along, unaware that each sentence added weight to the evidence already stacking against her. Julian remained calm, even gracious, through it all. He nodded at the right moments, laughed politely, clinked glasses when prompted. But beneath the surface, he was cataloging every phrase, every glance, every lie. By the end of the evening, he had what he needed. When dessert arrived, Julian raised his glass, offering a toast to new beginnings. The irony was his alone to savor. That night, as he returned to the home he no longer considered a sanctuary, Julian felt the shift. The plan was in motion, and it was no longer about surviving betrayal. It was about reclaiming control. Callista had underestimated the man she thought she could destroy. Julian Hayes sat in the sleek office of Jasper Cade, a divorce attorney renowned for his relentless courtroom strategy and unshakable focus. The city buzzed outside the tall windows, but within the quiet space, Julian laid out the full extent of his situation. Jasper listened carefully, his hands steepled, expression unreadable. Everything Julian had learned was now in motion. Callista's manipulation of his parents, her financial deceit, her relationship with Alden Crane, and the emerging evidence that pointed to something far beyond a simple affair. Jasper, intrigued by the complexity and clarity of Julian's documentation, agreed without hesitation. The case wasn't just strong, it was devastating. While legal preparations began, Julian discovered something even more unsettling. One late night, reviewing his financial data, he came across files buried deep in a shared archive. Documents labeled with initials unfamiliar at first, H+C design concepts, client transition strategy, and private leads. When he opened them, the truth became undeniable. Callista and Alden had drafted a complete business plan for a rival architectural firm. They had copied his designs, curated a list of his personal clients, and even detailed strategies for soliciting them once Julian was no longer a factor. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, calculated and methodical. Despite the growing storm, Julian maintained a perfect facade at home. He greeted Callista with a smile, listened to her stories, and pretended to be the same man she had always underestimated. The house became a stage. Every word, every interaction was now part of his preparation. He had installed a discreet system of cameras throughout the residence, concealed within everyday objects. Each recording added another layer of verification to his case. Callista and Alden continued to meet within the walls of the home, comfortable in their assumption of dominance. They were unaware their secrets were unraveling in high definition. One evening, Callista floated into the kitchen, her tone light as she began describing ideas for redecorating the living room. Julian, seated at the counter with his laptop open, nodded in agreement. His voice remained calm, affirming her choices. A small camera nestled in a decorative vase silently captured the exchange. Every conversation, no matter how benign it seemed, became part of his documentation. Julian no longer reacted emotionally. He had transitioned from victim to architect of justice. But while his home life was a facade, his professional world began to shift in darker ways. Meetings were unexpectedly canceled. Files disappeared from shared servers. A few clients grew distant, citing confusion or miscommunication. It took only a few careful calls for Julian to connect the pattern. Alden was attempting to sabotage him at work. Determined to stop the unraveling, Julian initiated personal outreach. He contacted clients directly, reaffirmed his role in their projects, clarified timelines, and reestablished trust. His voice remained steady even as frustration threatened to rise. One by one, he extinguished the sparks Alden had tried to ignite. It was during this chaos that he received an unexpected visitor. His younger sister, Vera Quinn. Vera stood at the front door with a defensive posture, her expression tight. Julian welcomed her inside, sensing that she came not as an ally, but as someone carrying Callista's narrative. In the living room, tension hung heavy as Vera accused Julian of cruelty and neglect, repeating words that had clearly been fed to her. Julian didn't argue. Instead, he placed a folder between them, filled with evidence, timelines, screenshots, and audio excerpts. Vera hesitated before opening it, but as she read, her face shifted from skepticism to stunned disbelief. The lies unraveled before her, the betrayal exposed in black and white. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered apologies, ashamed of having aided Callista without knowing. She had shared family financial information, updates about their parents' health, and even Julian's work schedule, thinking she was helping. Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, reassuring her. Callista had manipulated everyone, and it wasn't her fault. But now Vera could help make things right. She agreed without hesitation. As they formulated a plan together, Callista continued her performance at home. She moved through their space with practiced grace, still unaware of the trap being set. She spoke often of the future, suggesting weekend getaways, hinting at new investments. Each suggestion became another thread in the web Julian was quietly tightening. Declan Hart, the private investigator, delivered more evidence weekly: photographs, audio recordings, surveillance reports. The narrative built itself. A deliberate, methodical betrayal conducted with full awareness and intention. Julian organized the evidence meticulously. His case was no longer a defensive strategy. It had become a blueprint for dismantling a conspiracy. He worked late each night, balancing deadlines and documentation, meetings and memorandums, project briefs and private recordings. Every moment served a purpose. The sabotage at work, the betrayal at home, the legal groundwork. They were all pieces of the same puzzle. Callista and Alden believed they held the advantage. They mistook Julian's silence for ignorance. They thought the theft of love, loyalty, and legacy would go unchallenged. But Julian Hayes was done watching from the sidelines. He had transformed every wound into strategy, every lie into evidence, every loss into a calculated move. The next phase would require precision, patience, and the final mask of calm. And Julian was ready. Despite the carefully woven routine at home, Julian Hayes knew the final stage of his counterstrike was fast approaching. The legal documentation was nearly complete. The evidence against Callista Morgan and Alden Crane had grown into an undeniable mountain. And yet, Callista remained blissfully unaware, still operating under the illusion that her web of deceit was invisible. At work, however, subtle attacks continued. Confidential design files disappeared. Critical meetings were mysteriously rescheduled or canceled without notice. Whispers spread among clients and colleagues, most of them seeded with just enough ambiguity to cast doubt on Julian's reliability. He recognized the fingerprints. Alden's brand of sabotage was never direct. It was meant to destabilize, to provoke self-doubt. But Julian refused to be shaken. He responded with clarity and control, contacting clients personally, clarifying confusion, rebuilding trust where necessary. Slowly, he choked out every rumor with undeniable professionalism. At the same time, legal protections were implemented. Jasper Cade ensured Julian's intellectual property and business dealings were secured under new legal structures, shielded from any unauthorized use or misappropriation. Every design, every contract, every client agreement was now locked down. Then, without warning, Callista changed course. One evening, as Julian returned home from a late design session, she greeted him in the kitchen with forced concern and a rehearsed smile. She spoke of distance between them, of the need for reconnection. Her proposal was simple: a weekend retreat to a coastal resort. Just the two of them.
No distractions.
Julian concealed his reaction. He recognized the move for what it was, a diversion, perhaps even a delay. Callista sensed something slipping from her grasp. Her instincts told her to tighten the net. He agreed. The resort she chose was picturesque. Ocean views, candlelit dinners, sun-washed balconies. She was attentive, affectionate, almost theatrical in her efforts to recreate a connection. Every gesture was calculated. She was stalling, testing him, probing for cracks. Julian played along, even as he silently noted every contradiction, every manipulative smile. He watched her as she sipped wine on their balcony, already envisioning the life she expected to inherit. She had no idea the ground beneath her was already gone. On their third night, just as twilight bathed the shoreline in fading light, Julian's phone vibrated on the table. The message was brief but shattering. Both of his parents had passed, peacefully in their sleep, within hours of each other. For a long moment, Julian said nothing. Then, slowly, he read the message again. Grief pressed against his chest, but something colder settled behind it. The certainty that Callista would not mourn. Not truly. She approached, asking what had happened, and he told her. For the briefest second, her expression flickered. Not sorrow, but something closer to calculation. Then, with a tremble in her voice, she expressed her condolences, wrapping him in a mechanical embrace. Julian let it happen, noting the gleam in her eyes that betrayed the facade. The trip ended the next morning. Callista spoke gently of funeral plans, of the need to consult the family lawyer quickly. She insisted she only wanted to help Julian during this difficult time. Her concern rang hollow. Every word she uttered felt rehearsed. Back in the city, Julian set the final phase into motion. While Callista prepared herself for what she believed would be a windfall of inheritance, Julian arranged the transfer of all family assets into secure holdings. The estate had been updated before his parents passed. Callista, despite her efforts, no longer had access to anything. The house, once a shared symbol of their life together, had already been listed for sale under Julian's name alone. The deal closed quickly. Proceeds were moved into a private account Callista could never touch. When she noticed the changes, she approached Julian with a carefully worried expression. She suggested another conversation, just the two of them. She spoke of repairing what had been broken. Julian smiled wearily, agreeing that perhaps a discussion was overdue. She took this as a win. It wasn't. The next morning, Callista received an envelope on the kitchen counter. Her name was neatly written across the front. Inside were divorce papers, comprehensive, final, unyielding. Julian watched from across the room as she read the contents. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to fury. She demanded answers. Julian remained composed, stating plainly that he knew everything. Her affair with Alden, the manipulation of his parents, the attempt to steal his company and his future. Her outrage erupted, first in denial, then in anger, then in desperate pleas. She tried to reach him emotionally, calling upon years of shared memories. But Julian saw through it all. There was no sincerity, only self-preservation. She threatened retaliation, claimed she would ruin him publicly. Julian simply informed her that every detail of her betrayal was documented. Witnesses, recordings, financial evidence, even her attempts to defraud his family. She had no ground left to stand on. Minutes later, Alden arrived, summoned in panic. Julian met him at the door, calm and ready. In front of them both, he played back a recording. Alden's own voice, boasting about how they would dismantle Julian's company and take his clients. Alden went silent. Callista paled. Julian told them both they should contact their attorneys immediately. He gathered his briefcase, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The home, the history, the illusion, it was no longer his to carry. The courtroom awaited. The marble halls of the district courthouse echoed with tension as Julian Hayes entered the building. He moved with quiet certainty, his lawyer Jasper Cade at his side. Everything that had been planned was about to culminate in this final confrontation. Julian wore a dark tailored suit, his posture upright, his eyes unreadable. This wasn't revenge, it was closure. Inside the courtroom, Callista Morgan and Alden Crane sat beside their respective legal teams. Gone were their carefully constructed smiles, replaced by tight-lipped expressions and darting glances. Callista's designer outfit couldn't mask the exhaustion in her face, and Alden's usually slick demeanor had faded into unease. The hearing began. Callista's legal team attempted a defense rooted in victimhood. They painted Julian as emotionally distant, even controlling. They described Callista as a neglected wife driven to desperation. But Jasper Cade was ready. With calm precision, he dismantled each allegation, introducing evidence piece by piece. Witnesses testified. First, Vera Quinn, Julian's sister. She spoke with clarity and composure, explaining how she had been deceived by Callista's manipulation and had unknowingly provided her with sensitive family information. Her regret was palpable, but her resolve was firm. Then came a voice no one expected, Mira Halden. Once Callista's closest friend, Mira had grown uneasy with what she had seen and heard. She testified about the affair, the financial schemes, and the conversations she had witnessed that revealed premeditated deception. Document after document was displayed. Transactions showing missing funds, email exchanges discussing Julian's inheritance, surveillance photos of Callista and Alden's secret meetings, and audio recordings in which Alden spoke openly of plans to steal clients and launch a rival firm. When presented with the evidence, Callista's composure began to crack. She stood abruptly, pointing at Alden, insisting he had manipulated her. Alden, clearly unprepared for the sudden betrayal, retaliated with equal force, accusing Callista of orchestrating the entire plot. The courtroom descended into chaos as both parties scrambled to salvage their image. The judge called for order, and silence slowly settled. After a long pause, the ruling was delivered. The divorce was finalized under the original prenuptial agreement. Callista Morgan would receive no financial support, no share of Julian's assets, and was barred from any future claims. Furthermore, a permanent injunction was placed against both Callista and Alden, prohibiting them from using Julian's designs or accessing any information related to his business. Alden faced a separate investigation for financial misconduct, with pending charges already forming. Callista, once so confident in her schemes, left the courtroom with nothing but a name she could no longer hide behind. Julian didn't celebrate. As reporters gathered outside, he gave a brief statement, calm and measured. Justice had prevailed. He owed it to his parents, to himself, and to every person they had tried to deceive. In the weeks that followed, Julian began again. He relocated to a new city, one far removed from the familiar streets of betrayal. There, he launched his own firm, building from the ground up with integrity, talent, and quiet focus. His reputation grew quickly, bolstered by the very professionalism that had once been attacked. The office was modest at first, filled with moving boxes and fresh blueprints, but it was his. He worked long hours not out of necessity but out of passion. The clients he attracted respected his vision. They saw not just talent, but resilience. A message from Vera arrived one rainy evening, just as Julian was reviewing site plans. She asked how the new start was going. He replied with a quiet smile, telling her it was exactly what he needed. They spoke often after that, of family, of healing, of moving forward. A photograph of his parents rested on his new desk. It had been taken shortly before their passing, both of them smiling, unaware of the storm that would follow. He looked at it often, not with sadness, but with quiet gratitude. He had protected what they built, and now he was building something of his own. 3 years passed. Julian's firm had expanded. His name appeared in design publications and his team was growing. Awards lined one wall of his office, though he rarely spoke of them. He didn't need recognition. What mattered was the peace that finally took root in his life. One evening, long after the city lights had replaced the sun, a knock echoed through his penthouse. He glanced at the clock. Far too late for visitors. Curious, he opened the door. Callista stood there. Time had not been kind to her. Her once impeccable appearance had faded. Her clothes were worn, her expression brittle. There was no anger in her eyes now, only desperation and fatigue. She spoke softly, asking to talk. Julian said nothing for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing her in. Inside, she looked around at his success, at the proof that her absence had not destroyed him. Her voice trembled as she spoke of regret, of loss, of the spiral her life had taken since the trial. She had no job, no reputation, no allies. Alden was behind bars. She had nothing. She begged for forgiveness, not as a ploy, but as a last attempt to find meaning in the ruins she had created. Julian listened quietly. He felt no hatred, no satisfaction, only clarity. When she had finished, he walked to the door and opened it once more. Without raising his voice, he simply told her goodbye. She lingered for a moment, hoping for more. But Julian had already turned away, already returned to the life he had rebuilt. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, Julian sat at his desk once more. Plans spread out before him. The sound of the storm a quiet reminder of all he had overcome. He had survived the fire, and now, at last, he was free.